the gaps that they're facing. I'm going to read out, I think this was a report was done also still on the Daily Nation. It's a guest blog by Wanyonyi Simbaoni, who says that first, overcrowding in particularly public learning institutions is a pervasive issue. So then you have the issue of the lack of clean water and sanitation facilities, which makes maintaining proper hygiene and sanitation quite difficult, further increasing the risk of disease among students. So let the government prioritize the health and safety of students. The Ministry of Education and Health must work together to ensure learning institutions comply with the health and safety regulations. But then they wouldn't know if there was no report to clearly guide them on the challenges and the gaps that are there.
Actually, I think I'd like to come back to the policies that you're talking about, the guidelines and so forth. Because, for instance, from the Ministry of Education, there is a guideline on when you're establishing a school. How should the class sizes look like? In the dormitories, should we have double beds? Should we have, you know, the decker beds and so forth? How many learners should be able to use a toilet, for instance, water and sanitation facilities? All those are, you know, clearly defined within the guidelines and the policies that we currently have. But when it comes to implementation, that is where now things start falling through the cracks. Because, yes, you've talked about the high, you know, the push to have all children transitioning or accessing schools. But at the same time, are we increasing the number of teachers, for example, who are going to cater to the students? Are we ensuring that the infrastructure that the school has will be able to, you know, handle and be commensurate to the needs of the high enrollment that we're actually seeing in the particular schools? So in as much as we want to push for compliance of these particular policies, I think the ministry also needs to see how best they can be able to support the schools. Number one, for them to be able to comply. And also,
do you think we need regular inspections in schools?
Actually,
is that happening? I doubt if that is.
That is something that is mandatory. That is something that should actually happen, because we have quality assurance and standards officers who are expected to visit schools, expected to work even with public health officers who, you know, visit schools to be able to look at the health and safety of learners and so forth. So we actually have these resources. However, I know there are issues that they will talk about funding and so forth for them to be able to actually do their work. But the roles are very clear on the different levels of monitoring. The roles are very clear for the teachers and the school administration, you know, the public health officials, the quality assurance and standards officials. So we need an accountability mechanism to make sure that everybody is doing what they should be doing, and everybody should be supported to actually do their work and do it well. Because at the end of the day, the safety of the learners should, you know, be our number one priority.
But I feel like there is not a very clear picture or guidelines in terms of the framework that we have on the responsibilities of the stakeholders when you're talking about, you know, the teachers, the students, the parents, the board of management. I feel like there's a bit of either laxity or there's a overlapping of responsibility. At that point, that's when perhaps then we have these issues, because at the end of it all, we must see, you know, we can be able to specify the consequences of the default of, you know, some of these issues. Do you feel like we need more clarity in terms of the responsibility and guidelines that have been set out in the standards, in the regulations?
Yes, I'd actually term it as a disconnect between the different policies, for instance, the school health
because
policy.
Then you also have individual schools who have their own set of regulations and how each stakeholder is involved. But then you also have the national policy as well.
Yes. For the schools, they need to draw their, you know, customize their policies at the school level, but based on the national guidelines and the policies from the Ministry of Education and from the Ministry of Health, for example. The school health policy is very clear about the roles of the different actors. But I would say, do these actors actually even know about these roles? Are they aware of these policies?
So
she talked about
the issue of training.
Exactly, she talked about sensitization, you know. For you to be able to implement, for instance, guidelines and policies, number one, you need to be aware. Number two, you need to appreciate your role. Number three, you need to be supported. And also you need to, by support, I mean, you know, the regular quality assurance from the quality assurance and standards officers and even the curriculum support officers, for instance, for you to be able to make sure that nothing falls through the crack. So I think I'd put it as a disconnect between the various policies, you know, that might make people feel like there is that kind of overlap in terms of responsibilities on who is supposed to do what. So I think for me, I'd take it back to, you know, that kind of disconnect. The school policy, the Ministry of Education has guidelines about setting up of and establishment of infrastructure, for instance. What does the school health policy say about the same, you know? Are they speaking to each other? And are these two ministries, for example, health and education, talking to each other about, we set out to jointly make sure that we safeguard our learners in this particular way? Are we working together? Are we networking? Are we coordinating our efforts? You know, because if you work in silos, there is a very big possibility of you, number one, wasting resources, for example, and even not being sure how to even document and look at the impact of these different programs that are all meant to safeguard the learners.
Right.